in relation to issues of Senate voting reform, I think we should deal with that issue first up. And I was a participating member of that committee, of the Joint Standing Committee on Electoral Matters, and it wasn't difficult to be on that committee. If anyone wanted to be on that committee, the arrangement was that my crossbench colleagues could have participated. I've shifted my position from one above the line, an optional preferential below the line, or optional preferential above and below the line, because I think that would be unfair to minor parties, micro parties and independents. I think the solution is, if you want to get rid of the perverse outcomes you can get with our current preference whispering system, where you can have cascading preferences, which I don't think reflects the will of the electorate, and you do get rather strange results, where if you look at the preference deals done, you have, for instance, the climate skeptics were preferenced by the Greens in South Australia ahead of my running mate, who actually is a passionate believer in climate change and effective action. So I thought that was and there are many other examples in respect of that. I think the way forward in respect of Senate voting reform would be a compromise position where you require people to put at least 3 above the line and as many more as they want to above the line, but at least 3. So that way, most voters would have to think about voting, presumably 2/3 would vote for one of the major parties, but they would need to consider voting for a minor party or a micro party or an independent above the line. In terms of below the line, if it was a minimum of 10 below the line or 12 below the line, that would cover the situation of a double dissolution election in terms of exhausted votes. It's something that I've spoken to informally with Anthony Green, and I think that it is something that would be quite robust, and it would be an alternative position. Having thresholds and quotas would be quite sorry, Clive, you're in, and no, I mean, I think we should have that debate and discussion. In terms of the point made about when I was first elected to the South Australian Parliament back in 1997, I got 2.86% of the vote, about 35% of the legislative council quota. I can tell you there were no preference deals done. The only reason I got preferences from both the left and the right of politics is that they felt sorry for me. They thought that some joker running on a no pokies platform, there was no way he was going to get in. I was patted on the head a bit like one of those Benny Hill skits, you know, like here's some little idiot that is a village idiot running for Parliament. So I think that there wasn't any preference whispering going on at all. But I think that we need to look at that. I think the Senate is a better place for the diversity. I think Ricky Muir and Jackie Lambie and all my crossbench colleagues have made a terrific contribution. But I think, what do you say to voters who say, I gave my first preference to one particular party, but we've ended up with someone completely different as a result of cascading preferences? And I think we need to look at that very closely. So in terms of the new Senate, it does provide a real challenge to the government of the day. I think that the record number of crossbench combinations previously were 3 over the years, and now there are 9, including the Greens and 8 individual senators who have to be herded together by the government of the day, or indeed the opposition, if it depends, it's a question of opposing legislation. I think Annabel Crabb put it best, saying that it's a bit like bunnies in a basket. Just when you've got them all in the basket, one happens to pop out, and so it goes. I think issues of voting reform are important, but it must be done in a way that isn't seen to be unfair to minor parties and independents and micro parties. It needs to be fairly robust, and we don't want to rush it. I would rather we do nothing than rush forward with some changes that would basically choke off the ability of minor parties to be and independents to be represented. But I think it is important. We do need to deal with the whole issue of preference whispering and the undue influence of those involved in that. And I think it's not just micro parties that are involved in that. The major parties do their preference whispering of sorts as well, if you look at some of the preference deals that have been done. I'm happy to take your questions. I think that in terms of the way the Senate is working, Penny Wong is right. We had only the founding fathers of the Constitution, because there were no women involved in establishing the Constitution in those constitutional conventions. I think that we can make the system work much better than it does. I think there are real challenges to this nation, particularly in respect of productivity. I think politics has become incredibly toxic over the last few years, and I don't pick on one side or the other in respect of that. But I must, well, maybe I will pick on one side now in relation to this. I'm interested in seeing what the Prime Minister's views are, the government's views are on the anti-terror legislation. I thought we'd resolved that issue a number of months ago. I thought we were given the tranche of legislation that was supposed to keep Australians safer. I think to suggest that Mark Dreyfus is somehow wanting to invite terrorists back on Australian soil is really quite ridiculous. My view is that that sort of language, that sort of toxic debate does not help a rational public policy discussion. My view, subject of course to seeing the legislation, is that we need to look at the national security implications of allowing someone who is fighting with a terrorist organisation such as ISIS or Daesh, stripping them of their citizenship, knowing that they will never come back to Australia, but that they will be in an opportunity to cause, or they will have an opportunity to wreak revenge or cause harm to Australians overseas, find a place where Australians congregate, wherever that is in the world, and create mayhem and carnage. My view is that there ought to be a provision for preventative detention for those involved in terrorist groups, so that they're here on home soil but under lock and key, so they cannot do harm to Australians. I think that is a part of the debate that the Australian government hasn't thought through, and I think that the attack on Mark Dreyfus was particularly shameful, because my discussions with him about national security matters is that he wants to keep Australians safe as well. And I don't intend to be partisan, but the debate in the last few days has gone to one of quite ridiculous, of smearing someone over a piece of legislation we have not yet seen, and we haven't even considered the complexities of how do you best keep Australians safe. So I've said too much. I'm happy to participate in the debate, in the Q&A, or maybe a debate with Clive. And I look forward to the rest of the session. Thanks.